In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to work with files and directories if you're in VS Code, connected to the Docker container on Windows. Now this works a little bit differently than on Mac because on Mac, the home directory of your regular user on your host system on Mac OS is directly mapped to the home directory of the Jovian user. And so I'm in the Docker container. So as usual, if I do who am I, I'm going to see Jovian. And if I do ls, I'll see different files and directories. But these files and directories that I see here may not be directly mapped to the home directory that you would have on Windows. And there's a special reason for this. So when folks started using Docker with Windows directly and using the Windows file system, it was very, very slow. Particularly the loading and saving of files was incredibly slow. And then Windows developed what's called WSL and then WSL2. WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux. And within that, they could run different Linux versions, for example, Ubuntu. And within Ubuntu, you could then use Docker. And that worked really, really well. So that's now the default way in which you work with Docker is through WSL2 and in our case, Ubuntu. So basically you can think about your system as having your computer, your Windows system, as having two different file systems, two different sort of drives, if you will, that have a bunch of files and directories on them. If you've ever worked with network drives, or you've had multiple hard drives in your computer, like a C and a D drive, it's sort of like that, right? They're separate, but it's possible to connect them. So I want to show you how that would work. Now, when you're starting up your VS Code and you've got it connected to the Docker container, you'll see a bunch of different shortcuts. And quite likely the following will work. So if you click on desktop, it'll show you the files that are on your desktop on Windows. If you click on downloads, you'll see the files that are in your downloads folder on Windows and so on. But not all of these directories are mapped. Okay? And the reason for that is, again, we want to use our files and put our data and our code on the file system for Ubuntu and Docker. Because again, that's going to be much, much faster. So how do I get files from one file system to the other file system? Well, like I said, some of these are mapped. We've made shortcuts to desktop and downloads and probably documents and a few other things. So just be able to look into those directly. Right? So just in here, ls desktop, I can see files that are on the desktop. Okay. Now, how can I use something like File Explorer from Windows to see where the files are in the file system for WSL2 and Linux and what we're using with Docker? That is possible. So I'm going to show you here. I have an Ubuntu terminal open. Right, so this is my standard Ubuntu terminal. Right? So I've not got Docker running or anything, just a regular Ubuntu terminal. And I now type explorer.exe. And I'm just putting in a period here. I could put 2 periods. A period just means in the current working directory. 2 periods means one directory, one step up in the file directory. So I'll just do 1. So we're currently going to look inside this directory. This is going to open up a file explorer so we could see where the files are visible from Windows, just in a regular file explorer. And these are the same files that you see on your left here inside of VS Code. So if I want to drag files from anywhere on my Windows machine into the Docker container, I can just do this trick that I just did. Right? So just explorer.exe and then a dot or 2 dots again if you want to go up one directory. Press enter. And again, that's going to open up a file explorer. And I can just drag, let's say I've got something over here. Right? I've got a documents folder. I've got some stuff that I want to drag over. If documents is not already mapped, then you can just drag this into the file explorer over here, or you can actually drag it directly over here. Right? So I can drag this directly into, and let's just do that so you can see what happens. So we're just going to copy this. So it doesn't actually move the files. It just copies the files into the file system we're using with Docker. Okay. And so these are Windows files that I just copied. So here's an example Excel file, and here's a notebook about PyTorch. So again, I can just drag and drop files and folders directly into the Explorer within VS Code, or I can use, like I just said, I can use the explorer.exe trick, and that'll open up a file explorer, and then any other file explorer I have open, I can drag files over there. Okay. Now, once I'm inside VS Code and I've got access to my files, I can do the same types of things that I would do on a Mac. So, for example, I have created a subdirectory Rady MSBA, and I'm going to put all my class materials in there. So I've got one for MGTA 403, which is our AI assisted math and programming class. And let's say I want to add another folder to this. Let's do that. And I'm going to call it MGTA 451. There we go. And so here's our new folder. And what do I want to put into that? Actually, a file that I put into my downloads folder. And this is connected to the downloads folder on your Windows file system. And that's not going to be quite as efficient. So we're going to be better off dragging that directly into our folder for the system. Do I want to do that? Yes, go on ahead and do that. Right, and now the folder's been moved. The same thing with these different PDFs. So if I want to add those to my MGTA 403 folder, I'm going to create a new folder. And I usually actually do that through here. So let me just show you how I do that. Click on here on the new folder icon, and then I'm going to call that books. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to take these PDFs and I'm going to go on ahead and drag those over here. Okay. All right, so that's the basic idea with working with files. I hope that makes some sense to you. Again, it's a little more to keep in mind, to keep in memory, to think about how it works with files. But once you particularly remember that explorer.exe trick that I showed you, you'll be able to transfer files over to VS Code without any trouble. Now, the other thing, as the easy way, like I said, to transfer files is just open up the Docker container and connect it to VS Code. And then any file that you have on Windows, you can drag over directly into, in this case here, we're inside the Docker container in that home directory, and it'll add those files there. It doesn't, again, move them, it just copies them. Okay? If you have any questions about this, feel free to post them on Piazza.